I still can't believe what happened to us out there. My best friend from high school and I had planned nothing more than a simple winter camping trip. Just the two of us, off the grid for a week. We thought it would be relaxing, maybe even get some great drone footage of the snowy forest. Instead, we ended up living through the longest night of our lives, barricaded in the back room, listening to massive creatures pounding on the cabin door. I'm not ashamed to say it. I was more terrified than I've ever been. There were moments that night when I truly thought we weren't going to make it back home. We'd been planning this trip for months. Both of us had been grinding away at work all year and wanted to escape before the holiday season hit. My buddy had just splurged on a brand new, high-end drone, and he was dying to try it somewhere with epic scenery. We found a remote cabin for rent, about a 4-hour drive north of where we live, right in the middle of nowhere. The listing said the nearest neighbor was over 20 miles away. Sounded perfect to us. We headed out on a Friday in early December, watching the world slowly disappear behind us. Past the last gas station, past the last cell tower, past any trace of civilization. Snow covered everything, probably 2 feet deep in most spots, and the higher we climbed, the deeper it got. The cabin was just what we expected, old but solid. It had a wood-burning stove, a basic kitchen, and 2 small bedrooms. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, completely isolated. If the nearest neighbor really was 20 miles away, I believe it. From the front porch, all you could see in any direction was wilderness. No cell service, no internet, not a sound except the wind tearing through the trees and the occasional bird call. At first, the silence was unsettling. Both of us were used to the constant background noise of city life, cars, sirens, people talking. Out here, the quiet pressed in on you like a weight. But after that first day, we started to appreciate it. No work emails, no buzzing notifications, just peace. The first few days went exactly the way you'd expect a guy's trip to go. We mostly hung out, swapped old stories, and caught up on life. My buddy's married now, works in the industry, and has a baby on the way. He's got his life lined up in a way that honestly made me a little jealous. I'm still single, doing construction work, trying to figure out where I'm headed long term. Sometimes it feels like I'm way behind compared to everyone else from high school. One morning, we hiked half a mile to a frozen lake. The ice was thick, maybe 8 inches, and in places clear enough to see straight down to the bottom. We didn't catch anything worth keeping, but just being out there was enough. We drilled holes, set up folding chairs, and sat for hours in the freezing air, sipping coffee from a thermos and talking about everything and nothing. Pretty soon it became our daily routine. The snow around the lake was untouched, except for animal tracks, deer, rabbits, what looked like fox. Once we thought we saw wolf prints, though they were old and partly filled in with fresh snow. Back at the cabin, we spent a lot of time cutting wood. The indoor pile ran low pretty quickly, and we wanted to make sure we had enough for the week. There was a small shed out back with split logs, but we also collected deadfall from the forest. It gave us an excuse to wander, to learn the lay of the land. That forest was incredible. Huge pines, some probably centuries old, shooting straight up into the sky. In some spots, the canopy was so thick that hardly any snow reached the ground, leaving dark, cathedral-like spaces between the trunks. In other areas, natural clearings let sunlight pour in, forming meadows and open ground. Everywhere we went, there were signs of wildlife deer trails, paw prints, scratch marks on trees that looked suspiciously like bear claws. We told ourselves they were probably hibernating. At least, we hoped they were. One afternoon, we came across something that looked like a daybed, an impression in the snow surrounded by snapped branches, like something huge had been lying there to rest. But the real highlight of the trip was my buddy's brand new drone. He had dropped a serious chunk of money on it, professional grade, 4 Kelvin's camera, every latest feature. The battery life was incredible. The zoom could punch in from a distance without losing sharpness, and the gimbal kept the footage buttery smooth, even in gusty winds. He'd practiced flying it around at home, but this was the first time he could really put it through its paces without worrying about laws or people getting in the way. He came prepared extra batteries, a portable charger, even spare SD cards. This was the centerpiece of our trip, the real reason we'd chosen this remote cabin over some spot closer to home. On our third day, the weather was perfect for flying. Blue skies, a light breeze, the snow creating a winter wonderland stretching for miles. We bundled up and hiked about half a mile from the cabin to an open clearing with good visibility. My friend went through his pre-flight checklist like a pilot: battery levels, compass calibration, camera settings, He'd clearly been waiting for this moment. The drone itself looked sleek, matte black, about the size of a dinner plate, with 4 propellers and a camera mounted on a gimbal that could swivel smoothly in every direction. The first 20 minutes were breathtaking. From above, the forest stretched like an endless white ocean all the way to the horizon. Distant mountain peaks rose in the background, frozen streams slicing through the trees like black ribbons. From the sky, you could read the landscape like a map, how the valleys fed into ridges, how isolated we really were, miles in every direction, not a single sign of human presence. No roads, no power lines, no houses, just wilderness. My buddy's confidence grew as the drone responded effortlessly, hovering steady even when he took his hands off the controls. The live video feed on his tablet looked better than most television broadcasts. We were both amazed at what it could capture. We climbed higher, maybe 400 feet for wide, sweeping panoramas, then dropped low to weave between the treetops. The detail was stunning. Snow piled heavy on branches, icicles hanging from cliffs, even small animals moving through the underbrush. The drone was so quiet that the wildlife barely noticed it. We got gorgeous footage of a hawk perched on a dead tree, unfazed even though the drone floated less than 50 feet away. A little later, we watched a fox trot across a clearing, pausing to look up at the drone with curiosity rather than fear. As my buddy got more comfortable, he started testing its limits, flying through narrow gaps in the canopy, tracing the path of a frozen stream, even maneuvering between boulders. The obstacle avoidance system kept it safe from crashes. But we were pushing the tech hard. After about 30 minutes of flying, we decided to explore a denser patch of forest about half a mile out. From the ground, it looked like an impenetrable wall of trunks and branches, but from above we could see faint trails winding through it, animal paths linking open clearings. My buddy steered the drone carefully at about 50 feet above the ground, threading between the trees. The camera captured everything in crisp, jaw-dropping detail: bark textures, snow clinging to branches, even spider webs preserved in frost. That's when we spotted them, a small herd of deer, 3 of them moving single file across a clearing half a mile away. Beautiful creatures, cautiously stepping through the snow, pausing now and then to paw through for the grass hidden beneath. My buddy angled the drone for a better shot, zooming in on the deer as they foraged. We watched for several minutes, fascinated by the way they communicated through body language, how they took turns keeping watch while the others fed, how gracefully they moved through terrain that would have left us stumbling. That's when we saw it. At first, we thought it had to be another person. A figure was moving upright between the trees, about 200 yards from where the deer had been feeding, but that made no sense. We were supposed to be the only people for miles around, and whoever or whatever it wasn't dressed like a hunter. No bright blaze orange, no gear. My friend cranked the zoom all the way in, trying to get a clearer view. The image got grainy at maximum zoom, but we could still make it out a dark shape moving among the trees. It was on 2 legs, but something was off. The proportions were wrong, too tall. The shoulders far too wide, and it was walking through snow up to our waists like it was nothing. The strides were impossibly long, fluid, covering ground no normal human could manage. The longer we watched, the more uneasy we felt. This thing was massive, 8 feet tall at least, maybe taller. Its arms hung low, nearly to its knees. The shoulders were impossibly broad, giving it a triangular silhouette that didn't look human at all. And the way it moved, smooth, confident, deliberate, was nothing like what you'd expect from something that size. It glided through the forest with startling ease, stepping over fallen logs, ducking under branches, like it knew every inch of the terrain. We kept the drone hovering where it was, just recording, watching as it moved through the trees. It didn't seem to notice the drone overhead, too focused on whatever it was doing down there. For 5 straight minutes, we filmed it weaving through the forest. Every now and then, it would stop, examine the ground, then keep going. The detail was incredible. We could see the creature's body covered in thick, dark hair, almost black, with occasional lighter patches. Its arms were longer than any human's, swinging low as it walked. At one point, when it leaned to the side, we caught a glimpse of its head shaped long, sloped, angled in a way that wasn't remotely human. But what unsettled us most wasn't the appearance. It was the purpose. This wasn't some random wanderer. It was following a path, moving with intent, as though tracking something unseen. Once, it snapped a branch clean in 2, studying it briefly before tossing it aside. The sheer strength was shocking. That branch was thick enough that the two of us together would have struggled to break it, yet the creature snapped it like a twig. My friend and I just stared at the tablet screen, saying nothing. We both knew exactly what we were looking at, but neither of us wanted to be the first to say it. A Bigfoot. A living, breathing Sasquatch, moving through the woods like it had every right to be there. The creature moved closer to where the deer had been feeding, but by then the animals had vanished. They must have sensed it coming, smart enough to get clear of danger long before we realized what we were watching. For nearly 10 minutes, we tracked it as it roamed the forest. The footage was unbelievable, bright, steady, documentary quality, showing every detail of its movement. This wasn't the shaky, blurry kind of video people always dismiss. This was crystal clear evidence of something that shouldn't exist. The creature moved with absolute command of its environment. It knew which branches would hold its weight, where to step to avoid the deepest snow. This was its home, its territory. We were the intruders. We should have left it alone, should have kept the drone hovering safely at a distance. But my friend got carried away. Excited, he wanted a closer shot, something even more dramatic. And so he lowered the drone closer and closer to where the creature was moving. I told him to be careful, to keep his distance. Something about the whole situation felt dangerous, even though we were safely a few hundred yards away. But the footage was too good, so clear and detailed that it was impossible to resist the urge to get closer. The drone drifted lower, inching forward. At 150 yards, we could make out individual features. At 100 yards, we could see the texture of its hair, the way muscle shifted beneath the skin. At 75 yards, we could see its breath clouds of vapor rising into the frozen air. Then, at about 50 yards, its head snapped up. It had heard the whine of the rotors. For one terrifying second, it stared straight into the camera, and we captured a perfect shot of its face. It wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. Heavy bone ridges around the eyes, creating deep, shadowed sockets. A nose that was broad and flat, almost gorilla-like, but not quite. A mouth too large for the face, and when it opened slightly, we glimpsed teeth that were nothing like a human's. But the eyes, that's what froze me. There was intelligence there. A sharp, calculating awareness that sent chills down my spine. It knew exactly what it was looking at. For 3 long seconds, the creature and the camera locked on each other. The drone hung motionless, the lens fixed on its face. The creature stood still, processing what it saw. That's when it hit me. We had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't some dumb animal we could safely observe from afar. This thing was smart, smarter than we'd ever imagined. Then, without warning, it bolted. I've never seen anything move like that through deep snow. One moment it was standing there, staring up. The next, it was gone, tearing through the forest like a freight train. Trees shook in its wake, snow cascaded from branches, and thick limbs cracked and snapped behind it. The speed was unreal. Even with the drone's camera tracking it, we could barely keep it in frame. In less than 30 seconds, it covered ground that would have taken us 20 minutes to hike. It moved through terrain no human could possibly manage. And worst of all, it wasn't running blindly. It was following a path, deliberate, focused. A path that seemed to lead in the direction of our cabin. My friend yanked the drone higher, pulling it away from the area. Both of us were shaking partly from the cold, but mostly from adrenaline and fear. We had just come face to face with something that wasn't supposed to exist, and now it knew we were here. The return flight felt like forever, even though the drone had never been more than a few hundred yards from us. We scanned the forest below constantly, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that it might be heading our way. But everything looked normal, again, just endless, empty winter woods. When the drone finally touched down, we stood there in silence for several minutes, each of us trying to process what had just happened. It felt unreal, like it had happened to someone else, not us. At last, my buddy broke the silence. Did we just see what I think we saw? I nodded, unable to find words. We had just come within spitting distance of a creature most people dismiss as legend, and we had it on video. Back at the cabin, we pulled the footage onto his laptop. The quality was even better than it looked on the tablet during the flight. Every detail was there. Its size, its movement, the way it locked eyes with the camera before it ran. We must have replayed that short clip 50 times, trying to convince ourselves it was some trick of light, some illusion. But there was no denying it. It was real. And it was massive. Judging by the trees around it, the thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe closer to 9, and the face, that close-up, was the most terrifying part. Zoomed in, you could see the intelligence in its eyes. not animal intelligence. Something far more complex. It had realized the drone was man-made, understood that meant people were nearby, and made a conscious decision about how to react. But as the excitement over our footage wore off, it gave way to dread. That creature now knew we were in its territory. It had seen the drone, and that meant it had a rough idea of where we were, and we still had 4 more days left on the cabin rental. The more we talked about it, the more unsettled we became. When it stared into the camera, it hadn't looked merely startled or curious. There had been anger in its face, and the way it ran purposeful, directed, not panicked, made it seem like it had a plan. My buddy suggested we pack up and leave that night, but I convinced him to stay 1 more day. A winter storm was rolling in, and driving treacherous mountain roads in a blizzard seemed more dangerous than spending 1 more night in the cabin. Besides, the creature had bolted the moment it spotted the drone. Maybe it was more afraid of us than we were of it. That was our first mistake. Before heading inside for the night, we decided to walk the perimeter of the cabin, just to see if there were any signs of visitors. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows through the trees, and the temperature was dropping fast. Bundled in our heaviest winter gear, we carefully circled the clearing. What we found froze the blood in our veins. In the snow around the cabin, 30 yards out, were massive footprints, each nearly twice the length of our boots, stamped deep into the drifts. They were crisp, detailed impressions. You could see the shape of the toes, the texture of the foot, even what looked like claw marks at the tips. And that wasn't the worst part. There weren't just 1 set of prints. There were at least 3, maybe 4, different sizes, slightly different shapes. That meant we weren't dealing with a single creature. There was a group, and they knew exactly where we were. The tracks formed a rough circle around the cabin, as though something had been pacing, studying us. Some came right up to the walls, close enough that whatever made them could have peered through the windows if it wanted, and the prints were fresh. They'd been made while we were out in the clearing, focused on the lone creature we'd filmed. While we were distracted, the others had come here to scout our shelter. Maybe they'd been watching us all along, learning our routines, studying how we moved. We followed the prints 100 yards into the trees before losing them in a shallow patch of snow. But it was obvious these things knew the terrain better than we ever could. They had approached the cabin from multiple angles, using the landscape to stay concealed until they wanted to reveal themselves. The coordination was chilling. This wasn't random animal behavior. It was a tactical approach, organized, deliberate reconnaissance of our position. Standing there in the fading light, surrounded by evidence that we were being tracked and studied, I felt a fear I'd never known before. We were isolated, outnumbered, and facing something far bigger, stronger, and smarter than we had ever imagined. As darkness fell, the storm arrived. The wind hit first, then the snow, heavy, fast, relentless. Within an hour, we were in the middle of a full-blown blizzard, the kind where you couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. The wind screamed through the trees, a constant roar that drowned out everything else. We gathered everything important into one of the bedrooms. Phones, the laptop with the drone footage, backup batteries for the flashlights, some food and water. The cabin had electricity, but we prepared in case it went out. More than that, we wanted all the essentials in one safe place. The storm battered the building, making it shudder and groan in ways that should have been normal, but instead felt ominous. Every sound outside made us flinch. Was it just the blizzard, or was something moving in the dark, hidden by the howl of the wind? The white noise of snow and storm could have been masking 1,000 other noises. We tried to act normal, cooking dinner, making small talk about anything except what we'd seen that day. But neither of us could shake the feeling of being watched. Every time we passed a window, our eyes drifted toward the dark, scanning for shapes that didn't belong. The power flickered several times, probably from ice weighing down the lines. Each time the lights went out, even for a second, my heart pounded. The idea of being trapped in total darkness with those things out there was unbearable. Around 8 p.m., the wind began to die down. You'd think that would have been a relief. Instead, the quiet only made us more uneasy. With the storm's roar fading, we could hear other sounds. Branches cracking, snow sliding off the roof, the cabin creaking in the cold. But beneath it all, something else emerged: footsteps. At first, we told ourselves it was nothing but the storm or shifting snow. But these sounds had rhythm, a deliberate pattern that didn't fit with the storm's chaos. Something was moving outside, slowly, purposefully. We shut off the lights and tried peering through the windows, but the snow was too thick to see clearly. The footsteps went on for 15 minutes, circling the cabin again, closer this time, more careful. Whatever was out there wasn't just scouting anymore. It was planning. The sound stopped right outside the living room window. For a few minutes, silence. Then we saw it. Through the swirling snow, just barely visible, a huge dark shape stood less than 15 feet away. It didn't move, it just stood there, watching. Like a statue carved from shadow, while the blizzard howled around it. We couldn't make out details through the storm, but we could see enough. It was massive, taller than the window frame, broader than any man, and it was staring straight at the cabin, at us. Even with the snow and darkness, we could feel its attention locked onto our exact position. My friend grabbed my arm and pointed. Another figure had emerged near the corner of the cabin, then another near the back door. We were surrounded. The shapes held their ground for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. They shifted occasionally, one taking a few steps this way, another that way, but they never broke the circle. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted us to know they were there. Finally, as the storm surged again, the shadows faded back into the blizzard. But we knew they hadn't gone far. They were still out there, waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for us to make a mistake, waiting for the right time. One of them had been so close we realized just how big it truly was. Even hunched forward, its head brushed the eaves of the cabin. If it had stood fully upright, it would have cleared 9 feet easily. We backed away from the windows, keeping quiet, trying not to draw attention. It stood out there for 15, maybe 20 minutes, motionless. Then it vanished into the storm as suddenly as it had appeared. We thought maybe it was over. Maybe they'd had their look and moved on. We were wrong. Around midnight, the real horror began. The first blow on the front door sounded like a sledgehammer. The entire cabin shook, wood splintering under the impact. Then another and another. Each strike harder than the last, like something was trying to smash its way inside with brute force. Between the crashes, we heard a low, guttural growl. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. Deeper, more resonant, and filled with rage, frustration that it couldn't get inside. The growl carried something disturbingly close to language, like intelligence warped and amplified into something inhuman. We grabbed our phones and the laptop, bolted into the back bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. The lock was nothing more than a cheap push-button latch, something that wouldn't stop a determined person, let alone whatever kind of monster we'd just heard. But it was all we had. Then we started piling furniture. The dresser, the bed, anything heavy enough to drag against the door and window. The room was tiny, 8 by 10 feet, one small window facing the back of the cabin. If they wanted in, this little barricade might only buy us a few minutes. The pounding at the front door went on for 10 minutes, each hit harder than the last. We could hear wood splintering, metal hinges straining past their limits. These things weren't just strong, they were impossibly strong enough to rip the door off its frame if they wanted. And then, suddenly, it stopped. What came next was worse. Voices? Not human voices, but something like communication. Low, rumbling sounds rising, falling like conversation. They were talking to each other, deciding something. The silence that followed was suffocating. When they'd been slamming the door, at least we knew where they were and what they were doing. Now, we had no idea. Then came the sound of the front door giving way. The crack of splintering wood, the shriek of twisting metal, the whole frame disintegrating under brute force. Heavy footsteps thundered through the living room, slow and deliberate. The floor vibrated under each step, the walls groaning as something huge moved inside. Then the crashing started, furniture overturning, dishes shattering, wood snapping. It sounded like the sofa was being ripped apart. Not random destruction, methodical, like it was searching for something, or venting its rage on our belongings. Glass shattered, wood splintered, metal warped. Then more footsteps, not just one, at least 2, maybe 3 creatures inside the cabin now. They spoke to each other in those low, guttural rumbles, coordinating as they moved. For what felt like hours, but was probably 15 or 20 minutes, the cabin shook with destruction. Their footsteps passed from room to room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the second bedroom. Then they reached our hallway. The footsteps stopped outside our door. We heard heavy breathing on the other side. The doorknob turned slowly, testing the lock. When it held, a low growl rumbled, followed by the screech of claws raking deep into the wood. Deliberate gouges. long, slow scratches digging through the door. A shadow shifted under the crack, blocking the light from the hallway. It knew we were in there, no doubt about it. But for some reason, it didn't smash its way in like it had with the front door. Maybe it was testing us, waiting to see what we'd do. Maybe it was curious how humans reacted when cornered. Or maybe it was savoring our fear, dragging out the torment. Then came the sound. Not a growl, not a roar, but something eerily close to speech. Low, raspy tones, rising and falling in strange rhythms, like a language no human throat could produce. It was trying to communicate, talking to us. We sat frozen, unable to respond, unable to move. After 20 endless minutes, the footsteps finally receded, more crashing in the living room, then silence. A long silence, broken only by the storm and the creaks of the battered cabin. We didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. We sat there in the dark, straining to hear, wondering if they'd truly gone, or if this was just another part of the game. We never slept that night. We huddled in the corner of the bedroom, backs to the wall, listening to every groan of the storm. Every gust of wind felt like it could be hiding the sound of something returning. Snow fell in waves, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow that set our nerves on edge every time something flickered in our peripheral vision. Around 2 a.m., we heard footsteps again. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching in the snow, circling the cabin. But this time, they were different, more careful, more deliberate, as if the creatures were conducting a thorough inspection now that they'd had a chance to look inside. We could hear weight pressing against the walls, like something testing for weakness. At one point, the sound of claws scraping against the metal roof, one of them climbing up there, maybe. It was pure psychological warfare. Every time we started to relax, thinking they had finally moved on, another noise would jolt us upright. A scratch across a window, footsteps on the porch, that low, rumbling communication between them. They wanted us to know they were still out there, watching. Around 3 a.m., more footsteps passed by outside, but these sounded different, as if one had come back to report to the others. That thought chilled me. What if there were more out there? What if the ones we'd seen were just a fraction of a larger group living in these woods? We tried to take turns resting, one of us watching the window while the other sat back, but neither of us slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face again, looking straight into the drone camera, those calculating eyes, deciding what to do about intruders in its territory. By the early hours, we had silently agreed. When morning came, we'd leave, no matter what. But how? How would we pack? How would we even make it to the car without being ambushed? Around 4 a.m., the storm began to break. The wind died down, leaving the world eerily quiet. Too quiet. By 5 a.m., the snow had stopped completely, leaving a silence worse than the blizzard itself. Now we could hear everything, the snow sliding off branches, a night bird calling far away, the sound of our own breathing and racing hearts. And beneath it all, every so often, the faint movement of something heavy in the woods, waiting. When the first streaks of dawn broke through the window, we finally found the courage to pull the barricade aside and see the damage. The living room looked like a war zone, the sofa overturned and shredded, stuffing scattered everywhere, the coffee table smashed to splinters, the television hurled across the room, deep claw marks raked into the wood paneling. In the kitchen, every cabinet door ripped from its hinges, dishes shattered across the floor, food packaging torn open. Even the refrigerator had been shoved half off its base. And the drone, the one piece of proof we had, was gone, smashed into dozens of fragments, scattered across the floor. But my buddy still had the SD card. He'd pocketed it after the last flight, intending to back it up later. That tiny piece of plastic was the only thing we had left. Everything else, our spare clothes, camping gear, even food stores destroyed. The message was unmistakable. You're not welcome here. We didn't waste time packing. We shoved what little we had left into bags and bolted. The car was buried in snow, but by some miracle, the engine turned over on the first try. We had enough gas to make it back to civilization. We tossed the rest of our gear into the back seat and tore down that snow-covered road as fast as we could. The drive out felt endless. Every tree along the roadside looked like it was hiding something, every shadow like it might step forward to block our escape. We half expected something to appear in the middle of the road, cutting us off, but nothing came. Not until we reached the highway miles later did we finally breathe again. And it wasn't until we passed through the first town, saw cars, people, Streetlights, signs of ordinary human life that we let ourselves speak about what had happened. We had survived a night under siege by creatures that shouldn't exist, and we had video evidence to prove it. About halfway home, we stopped at a gas station for fuel and coffee. While my buddy was inside paying, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Across the road sat a black SUV with tinted windows, the same one that had been trailing us for nearly 50 miles. When we pulled back onto the highway, it followed. I didn't say anything to my friend, he was rattled enough already, but I kept one eye glued to the rearview mirror the entire way. The SUV stayed with us until we hit the edge of the city, then melted into traffic and was gone. Maybe it was paranoia, but after everything we had just lived through, I wasn't about to take chances. The footage spoke for itself. This wasn't a guy in a costume or some trick of the light. It was a real creature, filmed in broad daylight with professional equipment. The detail was extraordinary. You could see individual strands of hair, the play of muscles beneath its skin, and the unmistakable intelligence in its eyes when it looked straight at the camera. We had a few people with experience in video analysis look at it, and no one could find evidence of fakery. The movements were too smooth, too natural for a man in a suit, and the proportions didn't match any known species. The close-up of the face alone was worth more than every shaky, blurry Bigfoot video ever recorded. But the most compelling evidence was its reaction when it noticed the drone. The way it looked up, processed what it was seeing, and instantly fled showed decision-making far beyond that of a simple animal. It understood what the drone represented: human presence, human technology, and made a conscious choice to react. Its speed was unbelievable. In the footage, you can see trees shaking as it plowed through the forest, snow cascading from branches in its wake, and then, in seconds, it was gone. No human could move like that, especially not through waist-deep snow. Still, the video only tells part of the story. What happened that night in the cabin proved these creatures weren't just real, but territorial and potentially dangerous. The systematic destruction, the psychological warfare, the intelligence behind every move, all of it pointed to something far more complex than a simple wildlife encounter. The experience changed both of us forever. My friend, once a skeptic, is now a true believer. He's become obsessed with researching sightings and theories about where these things live and how they've stayed hidden for so long. As for me, I've grown cautious about spending time in remote wilderness. Knowing that out there are beings larger, stronger, and smarter than us forces you to think twice before venturing too far from civilization. Every camping trip, every hike in the woods, I find myself scanning the trees, looking for shapes that don't belong. And yet, we also learn that these creatures are intelligent enough to avoid direct conflict with humans most of the time. The ones that attacked our cabin could have easily smashed through that bedroom door if they'd wanted to. Instead, they chose to terrorize us, to wreck our belongings, and then leave. They wanted to show dominance, to make it clear we were in their territory. That alone suggests some kind of social structure rules for how they deal with human intrusion. They aren't mindless animals. They're thinking beings, reasoning beings. They've learned to coexist with human civilization by staying hidden in the deepest wilderness. Their coordinated behavior, their communication, the way they encircled the cabin, the systematic destruction, all of it points to a level of organization we never expected. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd just stayed home that week. If my friend hadn't bought that drone. If we'd picked some other camping spot. Would we still be living normal lives, never knowing creatures like this walk the forests around us? But then I think of all the others, those who have reported encounters over the years, and I realize we're not the first. For years, people who spoke about encounters like this were written off as crazy or desperate for attention because they had no proof. At least now, we know they were telling the truth. The footage we captured proves that Bigfoot is real, that these creatures exist in the remote forests of North America. But it also proves they are not the gentle giants some people like to imagine. They are territorial, intelligent, and potentially dangerous if you stray too close to their home. That night in the cabin was a warning. Stay out of our territory. Don't interfere with our lives. Respect the boundaries we've set. We were lucky. The creatures that surrounded our cabin could have done far more than tear apart our belongings. Instead, they chose to send a message, and we were wise enough to listen. The area where we filmed is still open to the public, but I don't encourage anyone to go looking for these things. From what we experienced, they do not want to be discovered, and they have ways of making their feelings clear to anyone who crosses into their domain. These beings have survived in the wild for generations, centuries, even by staying hidden and avoiding direct contact with humans. They've learned our rules, studied our behavior, and developed strategies to keep their existence secret. The last thing any of us should do is force them into situations where they feel threatened or cornered. This story is real. That's what truly happened in the Montana wilderness. It wasn't a hoax, it wasn't a publicity stunt, it wasn't a mistake or paranoia. It was a genuine encounter with creatures most people still believe are nothing but legend, captured in high-definition video and backed up by undeniable physical evidence. What we brought back is the clearest, most detailed documentation of these beings ever recorded. But it's also a reminder that the world is still full of mysteries, that there are still places where humans are not the dominant species, that there are creatures living in the wild that we don't fully understand. For over a year, we kept most of the details to ourselves, sharing only with close friends and family. These creatures deserve respect, and their story deserves to be told truthfully. They are not monsters. They are not myths. They are intelligent beings who found a way to coexist with the modern world by staying hidden. The drone footage proves they exist. The night in the cabin proves they should never be underestimated, and the coordination in their behavior proves they are far more sophisticated than most people dare to believe. That is the truth. That is what happened in those woods. And that is why I will never look at a dense forest the same way again.